Excellent. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for everyone for coming for this talk. So I'm Habib Noorbhai. I work as a professor in health and sports science at the University of Johannesburg and also serve as a visiting academic at MIT. So it gives me a great pleasure to present to you on Milliseconds Matter, time, decision-making, and XR in sports and high performance. So to set the context for this talk, this is a race by Usain Bolt, who ran the 100-meter race in 9.58 seconds. And what's really important to decipher from this is to basically debunk each of the seconds that has led up to it. And he finished the race in 9.58 seconds. The second place runner came in at 9.71, and the third place runner came in at 9.84. And what's important to distinguish is that the difference between the first and second, as well as the second and third place runner, is 0.13 seconds. And the difference between the first and third place runner is 0.26 seconds. But even more remarkable is that the difference between the first to the last place runner is under 1 second. It's 0.76 seconds. And they're all finishing the race in under 1 second when running a 100-meter. So I computed these times on a graph over 100 years, and I show the actual readings from 1920 until now. Those are the actual readings for the 100-meter race. And then I computed a logistic regression where I show the expected times, and it shows, based on the logistic regression, that the 100-meter record should have only been achieved in 2040, which means a runner like Usain Bolt is at least 20 years ahead of his time. And so the difference between 1920 and now is 1 second for the men's races. And so what we learn after 100 years is that females have become 3 seconds faster, but with males, after 100 years, they're only separated by 1 second in improving over time. And so milliseconds matter in the context of 100 meters. But the same could be said for the 800-meter freestyle world record time progression. We see a very similar pattern over a 100-year period where they have improved their times for the swim. And so the message is that records are meant to be broken. Athletes today that continue to perform at a higher level are a few decades ahead of their time. But the key question is why? It's multifactorial. We can think of a number of factors for why records have been broken. But I'm going to give you an analogy for what the possibility is. And so if we take hundreds and thousands of athletes in any sporting code, and they go into this kind of funnel, and this funnel can be known as something along a spectrum of mass sport participation to talent pathways. What we find that when they come out of this funnel, only a handful of these athletes go on to be elite or successful, which makes the landscape in sport right now incredibly competitive. And so if you want your child, if you want young athletes to compete at a high level, they need to know now, compared to 20 years ago, it's far more competitive than ever before. And so that paints a very important picture. So I've worked in sports science for almost 15 years, and we've always been dabbling on research between sports performance or injury mitigation. And COVID had propelled a spotlight around mental health within sport. But right now, we have a new dimension, and that is decision-making. And decision-making right now in sport is absolutely critical, and even for high performance. So the key question then is that how can XR further optimize or validate decision-making in a sport and high performance context, where high performers and athletes have to perform with fractions of a second under pressure? Can XR play that role in optimizing training? And so a good context for this is to understand who watched the movie Sully, by a show of hands. Great. This is led by actor Tom Hanks, and fast forward, just long story short, Sully lands a plane in the Hudson River. After the bird strike, he has to make a decision which is around 15 to 20 seconds. And lands the plane in the Hudson River, no fatalities, just minor injuries. But what we learned from this event is that Sully had, with his co-pilot, had portrayed theories of metacognition and the expertise theory. And that contributes towards high performers making decisions under pressure in limited time. And so when we understand metacognition, when we look at the fields of sports psychology, we taught all of these principles individually with athletes, but rarely are we taught all of these as a collective. And collectively, that theory is known as metacognition. And so high performers need a high level of metacognition, and XR certainly plays a role in proliferating metacognition. And so when we look at the exercise physiology or kinesiology context, these are a number of AI images that I've generated, but through every dimension that we find here, whether it's for a clinician or whether it's with a patient or with an athlete, irrespective of the modality being used within this context, they have to do these kinds of treatments or these exercises within milliseconds of a time. And so during the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of our students at the university couldn't go into the lab because of lockdown levels. And so we created a game for sports science students, and we then ported this web-based game onto an Oculus headset using Unity. So we developed the game using Unity, and these are the screen grabs from the VR game. This is a stress ECG for athletes, a pulmonary test for patients who have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, isokinetic test for the knee, shoulder, or ankle, Biodex balance for any patients who may have neuralgia or stroke or multiple sclerosis, and even understanding pain levels with different scorecards in tests, and the list goes on. And what we can see from this particular video on both your screens is that we just find that those students who use the VR game on the right of your screen are a lot more immersive in terms of the game to optimize their skills, their clinical reasoning, and their decision making when it comes to training as an exercise physiologist. So we certainly see that XR certainly plays a role in both athletes and high performance, but also in education when it comes to making key decisions. And so a reminder, when Sully landed the plane in the Hudson River, they had about 15 to 20 seconds to make that decision. With surgeons, irrespective of the type of surgery they're making, high-performing surgeons, high expertise, limited time, high pressure, they also have to make decisions within that time frame. Photographers as well, capturing your moment in milliseconds, that takes expertise, and the expertise theory comes into professions like these. Formula One, each of these people around the car have a role to play. And if any of them are slower in milliseconds, it can affect the driver's lap position or lap time within the race. So personally, I've always been passionate about how cricket batters have evolved over time. And it's not a common sport in the US, but surprisingly, the second most popular sport in the world, even outside of Asia. And so when a cricket batter comes onto bat, there's several deliveries that they have to face. And the difference between baseball is that there's a bounce. So there's two trajectories that they have to anticipate. And the key question that we had is, how long does a cricket batter have to make a shot selection decision to a cricket bowler? And the long equation, if you look at it very simply, using 150 kilometer-hour delivery, is 0.48 seconds. They have to make. And it's very similar in the context of baseball. Converting kilometers to miles, 90 miles an hour, they have under half a second to react to the ball. But we got to break that down, and we find that irrespective of the speed, whether it's a spin bowler or a fast bowler in cricket, it's all under 1 second. So irrespective of the speed, they have less than 1 second to react. But we got to break this down from a visual and neural stimuli perspective. And when we break it down for a spin bowler, we find that within that 0.78 seconds, there's different events that occur in the brain at the cognitive level before they make that decision. And with fast bowlers, it's even shorter, but they have different events that they've got to anticipate when making that decision. So what role does XR have when it comes to training batters in this kind of example? And so within VR, we have a number of handles or of a number of haptics that we could use in the context of cricket, with tennis, and with baseball. And my students have done some work in tennis, and we're currently also doing some work in the context of cricket. And so when I looked at all of the devices, all the headsets in VR, I found 4 prominent ones that really play a key role in the sports and high-performance context. And even more notably was the Pico, because it has an eye-tracking feature. And so I've been dabbling in a little bit of cricket myself and used the IB cricket to play some cricket to really understand how that could assist cricket players in terms of training and trying to understand what kind of data we can derive to further help cricket batters within this context. And so the video that you see on your screen is me playing cricket in VR. So it's basically simulated. That's known as a helicopter shot in cricket, which is usually quite rare. And it's basically 360 degrees cricket playing with the IB cricket game. And it's obviously very fun, but how can we take that a step further to really understand how could we potentially use similar kind of simulations for cricket batters? And so if you ever want to know what a lab rat looks like, well, that's me. And it's very uncomfortable to have a VR headset and a VO2 mask on at the same time. So I think that might change in the future. But this is a collaboration with the MIT Immersion Lab in Cambridge. And we had a number of measurements that we were trying to look at where we could compare VR batting with and compared to without VR batting and what those differences might look like. And so we have, so this is basically just some pictures from the lab looking at motion capture, force plates, accelerometry, gyroscopes, VO2 max, EMGs, grip, heart rate, etc. And these are some of the data items that we looked at. And the reason why we were so holistic and comprehensive with the data points was that the limitations with having these tests in a lab-based environment, it's not always possible to port that onto the field. But a lab-based environment is the best way to understand a full capability of an athlete. So how do we incorporate all of these elements of data, but then also integrate VR as well, so that we can really understand some insights in terms of how we could potentially maximize training or performance for an athlete. And so when we're looking at something like VR, we could at the same time look at it with motion capture. So while they're actually playing the ball, we can then see, and I'll just play that again, while they're actually playing the ball, we can then compare it to the skeletal data of them hitting the ball at the same time. So that's the kind of idea of where we're going, of merging XR with sports science in the future. And that just gives you some simulated data of what a bat swing would look like both in 2D as well as 3D. And this would be some insights for coaches and players so that they can understand what the weakness points are, what the improvement areas are, what the strength points are, and how they could potentially improve. And then with the EMG data, we can then understand what is the muscle activations using VR during the swing. So that's a swing at 0.2 seconds, and that's the amount of time a batter usually takes when it comes to a swing. It's usually between 0.2 seconds or 0.25. But within that milliseconds of a time frame, which muscles or joints are actually being activated with EMG, and if there's any particular injuries, how can they mitigate that? And the same could be said for metabolic markers or physiological markers. We can understand with VO2 and heart rate what's happening with a cricket batter during that swing. So we can even integrate aspects of anxiety or pressure with or without VR, and how VR could be used as a training tool to optimize a cricket batter or an athlete when it comes to mitigating anxiety or pressure. And then lastly, with kinematical angles, we can look into the joint angles during a batting swing using VR as well. So we then published a paper. We looked at a paper called A Conceptual Framework and Review of Multi-Method Approaches for 3D Markerless Motion Capture in Sport and Exercise. And this was recently published in the Journal of Sports Sciences, where we looked at markerless motion capture. And you might be aware that the future right now around biomechanics and performance analysis is looking at computer vision models so that we can decentralize access for a lot of athletes with markerless motion capture. And I think the future going forward is that how do we combine markerless mocap with XR from a performance analysis standpoint? And so to summarize, recommendations in future directions for the work going forward is that we would like to expand the protocol validation even further, but also across context. How can we apply XR validation frameworks to other sports, baseball, football, tennis, paddle, pickleball, etc. Include different athlete levels as well as game scenarios. Deepen neurocognitive integration, so merge electroencephalography with EMG and eye tracking with XR to map real-time decision-making and brain-body performance dynamics so that we can really understand on a more holistic and robust level how we can optimize training and performance for an athlete. We could also look into enhancing the human AI XR synergy and developing adaptive XR tools that integrate AI analytics and supporting decision augmentation in coaching and rehab. And translating XR insights into real-time feedback. Use XR findings in coaching, injury mitigation, and mental readiness, for example, even with integrations of apps and applications that may even have computer vision models. And then lastly, global collaboration in longitudinal tracking. Initiate multi-site trials and track long-term athletic performance using XR-informed protocols. I must also inform everyone that volumetric technology is also taking rise in the sporting context. We're seeing, like, for examples of companies like Canon that are using volumetric technology or volumetric cameras within basketball courts. There's a number of leagues that are speeding up the game in training on the NFL field, on the football field, or even on the basketball court, so that they can optimize their decision making. And these are the kinds of areas that we see where progression would occur in the field. So I'd like to thank my partners for the collaborations and for the ongoing work. And thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to take any questions.
In the lab, were you using an actual physical ball to hit so that the modeling of the impact was, the impact was also modeled?
No, it was just occlusion and it was VR. And basically this was the bat that we were using. So, and this is the IB cricket bat. So this is an example of a haptic cricket bat going forward in future, but this kind of innovation also needs a lot of improvement because the haptics is not near precise. And I think with technology, these kinds of haptics will improve over time.
Do you know of anybody that's done skating, ice skating or, blades with this kind of work?
I don't. I know people have done work in martial arts and fencing, but not in those sports, no.
Hi, yeah, I'm just wondering, did you guys do any exploration into full contact sports, or on this, besides that, any proxy studies in lieu of, if that wasn't done?
So we haven't done any research work on full body contact, so with the football or rugby or Australian football just yet. We're mainly just focusing on skill acquisition sports, so like batting, tennis, etc., or even fence. So a lot of things around skill anticipation. So we've done work with fencing or looking at other colleagues doing work in martial arts. But with full body contact, that would be a challenge depending on where the VR headset is placed. Right. But where full body contact sports does have a role is in terms of the cognitive level, so anxiety and pressure. So especially if athletes are conducive towards choking or the hips, which is common in athletes. How does a VR play a role? So there's not much research that has been done on that, but we did have a VR in sports medicine and exercise science symposium last week, and one of the keynote speakers was from the NFL, and they talking about how they want to incorporate VR integrations in terms of the quarterbacks anticipating different tackles, or even speeding up the different plays so they can optimize decision making, or even in terms of coping with anxiety or pressure leading up to potential body contact.
Got it. Thank you. Hi. Is this on? Hello. Oh, hi. I'm Patrick. We have a customer that does uses XR for shoulder rehabilitation, so it's not exactly sports. But one thing that I was wondering is how much you said next steps are like applying AI to the data sets that you have. Are you talking about like using AI directly? Have you done any research yet on using AI directly on the captured motion data, or are you talking more about like AI like using like ingesting video? Where do you think that AI can be most useful in what you're studying in terms of optimizing the performance?
Yeah, Patrick, that's a great question. So I think more in terms of real-time performance feedback. So conventionally, when we're working with athletes or coaches, it takes quite long for scientists or video analysts to give some insight or pattern recognitions around performance. So I think with AI integrations going forward, real-time feedback is really going to be optimal, and how we can ensure high-fidelity insights both during the game, before the game, or even after the game.
So not as much focused on like analyzing data that's been collected after the fact. You're saying like they want to see right away, well, how am I doing in the moment?
You can do it before, during, or after, but I think more of the focus and emphasis would be during real time, so that we can understand performance patterns, a lot better and a robust level. Yeah.
Oh, we do have a break after this, so just letting you know that we don't have to stick to the 5-minute time.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm Ming Xiao from the Bronx VA Medical Center. We've tried to use, EEG, EMG, and then MOCAP to access more on the rehab field. But I'm just wondering, have you tried or have you seen any studies that have used EEG and also eye tracking to access decision time, reaction time, or attention accordingly?
Absolutely. I mean, there's multiple studies that have focused on it, especially in the optical field. I mean, eye tracking has been done quite a bit. So, I mean, we're partnering at our university with the optometry department with the sport of paddle. So we can maybe understand decision making looking at visual acuity or even looking at dominant eye. So there's different parameters that one could look at from an eye tracking perspective or even gaze behavior. I mean, that can say a lot about what an athlete is doing depending on the sport type. But with EEG, with brain activity, that can be a bit tricky because it depends on the type of EEG method or a device that you have. Some basic EEG devices just look at waves and beta, alpha waves and just basic kind of data. But the more robust EEG devices looks at gamma waves and a lot more of the pixelated aspects around what's happening in the brain. That's a lot more robust. And the tricky thing is, how do you put an EEG cap on with a VR device at the same time? But I think going forward, once we have more smart glasses coming to the fore, that might be a potential combination. The other aspect with EEG, what's tricky from a reliability standpoint is that it's mostly used just for basic movements or when people are in static positions. So if there's any dynamic positions, it sways the gamma waves completely and doesn't make it very valid. So that's the challenge we have now with brain activity. And that's why, for example, with cricket, where it's just like a two-step movement, you couldn't necessarily have a lot of the interference of the waves. And so we'll be able to understand better at the prefrontal cortex or the motor cortex what's really happening with a batter or an athlete when it comes to that movement capability.
Apologies, we do need to stick to time so I don't anger the AV team. They're human and they do need to eat lunch. We have time for one more minute.
Hi, my name is Drake, and I'm currently playing college golf over in North Carolina A&T. And I was wondering, I know this is kind of heavily hitting on the physical performance, but I play golf, most people say that golf is 95% mental, 5% physical. So what about this device would target the mental side of things?
Big time. I think VR certainly has a role on the cognitive side for all sports. It's a bit different with golf because you're hitting a static object that's on the ground and it's not really oncoming. But as you say, it is largely mental. So how do you tap into the mental side to optimize metacognition, which we just touched on? So metacognition is really the key, not just for golf, but for all sports.